Your assorted honours, with the greatest respect, whereas, and notwithstanding the generality of the foregoing, to begin essentially at the beginning, or in any other manner howsoever, or as the case may be, if at all, let me say, subject to such subsequent statements as may hereinafter be made, good evening. All words to that effect. But on the one hand, and on the other, the question is surely not whether the evening is good in layman's terms, but whether we can make a case out of it. And indeed we shall, as we debate, or, in the alternative, skillfully circumvent the motion that lawyers have lost their appeal. And here to guide us through the prickly thickets of the law are 6 of the world's thickest lawyers. I'm sorry, slickest lawyers. For the affirmative, Tim Felonious Ferguson, Lisbeth the litigator Gorr, and David Long Affidavit Lange. And for the negative, Penny Big Win Biggins, Professor Ross Harp on the Point Harper, and Peter Star of the Bar Moon. Before we ask our ardent advocates to hand up their briefs, let's look into them. US Attorney Clarence Darrow observed that the trouble with law is lawyers. And according to Ambrose Bierce, a trial is a formal inquiry designed to prove and put upon record the blameless characters of judges, advocates, and jurors. Of those 3 groups, judges must be even-handed. As one judge freely confessed at the beginning of proceedings, this morning in chambers I received the sum of $10,000 from the plaintiff. I also received $15,000 from the defendant. I propose to return $5,000 to the defendant and am now prepared to hear the case on its merits. For their part, advocates are very incompetent. I beg your pardon, advocates vary in competence. And a jury, of course, consists of 12 persons chosen to decide who has the better lawyer. To sum up, as Mr. Justice McGarry famously adjudged, you can always tell the state of a lawyer's health by looking at his mouth. If it's shut, he's dead. But could even that make lawyers even less appealing? Tim Ferguson has always been appealing. Visually, his baby-faced good looks have seduced many a High Court justice. And verbally, his bare-faced cheek has been the subject of massive and endless litigation, exhausting all the profits he was hoping to make from his current national tour. While his fellow members of the Doug Anthony All-Stars remain permanently behind bars, Tim props up the bars of theatres everywhere. To open the case for the affirmative that lawyers have lost their appeal, Tim Ferguson.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, honoured guests, members of the jury, my lord, let's not mince words. Today's debate is not a game, it is a trial. And to prove that there is no hope whatsoever for the accused, Lisbeth Gorr, the splendiferous spunk rat of sport, and David Lange, the esteemed and steamy former Prime Minister of a country whose name eludes me at the moment, and myself will present damning evidence that lawyers have indeed lost their appeal. They've lost their appeal, they've lost their way, they've lost their sense of justice, and one of them has lost their BMW keys. Forever. Now, the only contention our team has with today's topic is that we don't actually believe lawyers had any appeal in the first place. Let's just look at the great triumphs of lawyers over the years. To start with, the trial and jailing of Nelson Mandela. That was a good one. The trial and burning at the stake of Joan of Arc was a crackling good time. The Spanish Inquisition. And, of course, the Guildford Four. Lawyers lied and cheated to accuse them of IRA crimes they did not commit. Good God, people. Daniel Day-Lewis was nearly killed. Lawyers have lost all kinds of appeal throughout the years. Chiefly, they've lost their financial appeal. I mean, lawyers, they're just like prostitutes. They charge like wounded bulls. They never refuse a client. The only difference is there's less heavy lifting involved. And everyday lawyers don't just laugh their way to the bank. They sing, they dance, they click their heels, they do cartwheels, handstands. Mind you, no handstands from the kilt wearers in the opposition this evening. There are children present. Lawyers have rigged the law in their own favour. Bad lawyers go to Parliament, where they make bad laws. This way, other lawyers can make a fortune unravelling the bad laws. This can go on for centuries, and it has. Lawyers have lost their legal appeal. Family lawyers organise divorces. Business lawyers sue businesses out of business. Criminal lawyers defend murderers, thieves, and cutthroats. When Charles Manson was accused of vicious atrocities that he happily confessed to, it was a lawyer who leapt up and said, "Wait, what's he done? Nothing!" That's because lawyers are liars. Lawyers, of course, have lost their medical appeal. It's true. Lawyers are just plain bad for your health. Christopher Skase was fine, very healthy. He had a half-hour lunch with his lawyers. Next thing you know, the poor bugger's in a wheelchair acting like Darth Vader sucking oxygen out of a tank. Alan Bond was a bloody genius. His mates used to call him Brain Man. Half an hour with the lawyers, Rain Man. There were 42 matches in the box. I can't recall a thing. I can't recall a thing. And, of course, the whole country is watching John Elliott's health with great interest. Lawyers, of course, have lost their sex appeal. I think it's going to be a long time before we see Cosmopolitan's luscious lust buckets of the law calendar. Monday, whoa, here he comes, girls. Sexy rumpole of the Bailey, shake it, rumpy. Bit of rumpy-pumpy there. Tuesday, hold yourselves back, Frank Galbelly's potbelly. Nice rubbing there. Wednesday, sexy pics of Judge X who says, "There's nothing wrong with wearing wigs and frocks and hanging around in men's clubs." Sure, Judge, unless you live in Tasmania. Thursday, star of the Pelican Brief, Miss Julia Roberts. I suppose you could call her sexy if you like the shot whippet look. Myself, I think Humphrey B. Bear would have been better in the role. At least he keeps his trap shut. Friday, Tom Cruise, star of The Firm. The Firm. If Tom's IVF program's anything to go by, he's anything but. It's got to hurt a little. And then on Saturday, we have sexy Chris Murphy. Hot, not. And Sunday, Janus. Now, and of course, in the fabulous ABC production about lawyers called Janus, we see what scumbags and filth lawyers really are. Now, they actually wanted to call Janus something more appropriate, but the ABC legal department kicked up a stink, of course, so they kept the original name and just tacked on a J. And, of course, the idea of having the character Janus given the first name of Hugh was ruled out in a similar fashion. Are you with me, Australia? Are you with me? Yes, they're catching on. Speaking of sex, of course, it's been said 1,000 times that the only difference between a sperm and a lawyer is that at least a sperm has a 1 in 500,000 chance of becoming a human being. Now, I can see some people actually looking at members of our team and thinking, wait a second, Lisbeth Gorr, wasn't she a lawyer before she became a goddess? And David Lange, wasn't he a lawyer before he became a Prime Minister? Well, you're quite right, Libby was a lawyer. And the shame of her crimes left her a wreck. A physical and spiritual weakling, barely able to even pick up a pencil. And David Lange was a lawyer, but that was only in New Zealand, where the only crooks are the ones who use to haul the sheep closer. My colleagues have reformed. They have reformed. It is from them that you will hear terrible tales of the skullduggery of the law, and it is from our team that you will learn the eternal lesson. Lib, Lange, and prosper. You, my friends, must decide today what we are to do with these culpable culprits of the law, with those pusillanimous pirates of perdition, those pompous predators of the poor and pathetic, those pious and preposterous perpetrators of palpable poppycock, those perverse and peevish pickpockets whose prime principle is pump up the payment or piss off. They're nothing more than a prancing pack of ponces, a pitiful and putrid pestilence, a pungent pageant of pernicious, patronising popinjays and purple, poxy, peripatetic pricks. I don't know how that got there. Today, my friends, you are the judge, the jury, and the executioner. We have no doubt that you will decide that lawyers have indeed lost their appeal. But you may also decide that lawyers are not guilty. And you may be right. After all, they'd need a conscience to feel guilty. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim, and best of luck with your application for admission to practice. The long arm of the law has often given women a greater than usual measure of rough handling. A notable exception was the divorce court of Mr. Justice Karminski, who remarked, "The wife who threw almost every form of domestic utensil at her husband cannot be considered cruel because on almost every occasion she missed." I submit that Penny Biggins' career has been more hit than miss. In a decade, she's appeared with the Castanet Club, the Medley Sisters, and the Gang of Four, which was given a suspended sentence, and has hosted Radio National's Live Wire, which was summarily executed and is now awaiting trial. She's a regular pianist on Play School and is up on a charge of corrupting minors. In her defence, she's a major talent. To open the case for the negative, arguing that lawyers have not lost their appeal, Penny Biggins.
Your Honour, members of the jury, thank you. Well, Tim. It's obvious to us that you just don't know your rumpole from your Janus. We do. One's large and hairless and lives in London. Well, what would we do without lawyers? Yes, that is the question that our team will be posing this evening, and frankly, I would be languishing in a police cell at this very moment. Oh, I've had a hideous day, let me tell you. It's actually a miracle that I am here this evening. The day started as it does. I woke up this morning, as one does unless one's dead. And I noticed that my husband wasn't there. In fact, he hadn't been there all night. Well, I was straight on the blower immediately to a divorce lawyer. She was great. She said, "Look, Penny, as this is your first divorce, I suggest you go halvies on everything, the house, the car, the kids." I said, "Sure, okay, but bag's either half of the kid that's wearing the watch." Yes, despite my pain, I still had room for humour. Well, shoved the kids in the car, I'm backing down the driveway and I rung smack into a removal truck that's stuck in the middle of the road. Ooh, I was extremely stressed at this stage and I'm abusing the driver furiously. I'm a little bit like La Stupenda, I suppose. I'm not particularly racist. But he said he'd sue, so I had to run inside and ring a racial vilification lawyer. Oh, I said, "Look, the kids, you can get yourself to school. I don't want to know about it." I took up smoking on the way to the station. Well, eventually, I finally I got on a jam-packed train. You know how crowded they are in the morning. And totally inadvertently, I caressed this man's buttocks, you see. He turned as well. Not around, he just turned. But he was very kind. He lent me his mobile phone and I was able to ring the sexual harassment lawyer. By the time I got into the city, I was just so tense, I thought there's nothing for it. And I went on a wild rampage through the David Jones glassware section. You'd be amazed how relieving it is. Well, Tom, the extremely attractive duty solicitor at the police station, was very, very charming, and in fact I was a little bit disappointed when my husband turned up. He asked me why I'd forgotten that he was attending the overnight bonding workshop. So I was back on the phone again, ringing the divorce lawyer. So I told her I want the house, the car, the lot. He can have the kids. Now, the extraordinary thing about this was that it did not cost me a cent, because with my newly acquired status as a single mother, I got the whole thing on legal aid. But while I was sitting in the police station, I thought, oh, Penny, if this proves anything at all, it proves one thing, that lawyers exist merely to serve. If there's a problem here this evening, it's not the lawyers, it's the laws. Now, just off the top of my head, I mean, obviously, there are many of our laws that are completely odious and should be done away with immediately. No, John laws. Really? Yeah. But I thought, well, just who makes these laws? Any ideas? Yes, politicians. As Tim pointed out, the likes of David Lange. Turned his back on the profession that had trained and nurtured him for so many years. He just woke up one morning and said, oh, I'm sick of all this conveyancing. No more old ladies' wools for me. I want to be the Lord Mayor of New Zealand. A man who could have become Justice Lange. But no, instead is just as happy to wait for retirement in his gold Ugg boots. It's true, isn't it? Some countries don't have legal systems to annoy them. But imagine this. Libby Gorr, having vox pop senseless every man, woman and child in Australia, decides to take her skills abroad to, say, somewhere really fashionable, somewhere in South America like, or El Salvador or Peru. There she is, busily, enthusiastically running up the main streets of Lima, thrusting her microphones at the unsuspecting populace, when all of a sudden, up comes the truck, she's bundled into the back, wrapped up in a camouflage poncho and force-fed burritos. But before she's unceremoniously dumped upside down in a garbage skip with a jalapeno pepper shoved where the sun never shines, I don't think she's going to be wasting her one and only phone call ringing up TV Week, is she? Well, maybe she would. But her second phone call would be to a lawyer. And yes, little Lizzie Evatt would be on the next plane out, coming to the rescue. Oh, lawyers haven't lost their appeal. Trust me, they are as sexy as tomorrow. In fact, I've come to the conclusion that there is a lawyer who would make a suitable life partner for every person in this country. Well, there's so many of them, aren't there, which is a good thing. Now, take, for example, your average corporate lawyer. Snappy, well-dressed and hideously wealthy. Now, if one of these suave sophisticates offers you a lift in the Porsche and dinner for two, are you going to go and sort of like just turn around and say to her, oh, no thanks, I'm happy to stand here waiting in the pouring rain for the bus. Besides, I've got a very lovely tin of Tom Piper braised sausages to look forward to when I get home. You're in that car before you know what's what. And let's not forget the ideologue, the tireless fighter for social justice. Oh, and believe me, socks and sandals can look sensational on the right set of legs. I've seen David in them. Very cute. Lawyers haven't lost their appeal. Come on, just feast your eyes. Feast your eyes on these two spunks. There's lively, open, hard-working faces that stand for social freedom and justice. While over here, don't look for too long, you might get upset. We see nothing but the pasty, self-serving, self-seeking faces of lawlessness and anarchy. And... oh, well, appealing to some, I suppose. But finally, how can you have anything but respect and admiration for a person who's prepared to stand up in front of a courtroom full of total strangers with nothing but a little thatch of tailored pubic hair on their heads? I rest my case. Thank you.
Penny was in court again today with her brother Jonathan, both charged with conspiracy to pervert television. Mr. Biggins, intoned the clerk, where do you live? No fixed address. And Ms. Biggins, where do you live? Thinking quickly, Penny replied, I live in the flat above him. By contrast, the whereabouts of Lisbeth Gorr remain mercifully unknown. Heavily disguised as low-tackling sports reporter and high-living good-time girl, Elle McFeast, Lisbeth, like me, studied law but left the legal profession to take up acting seriously. Regularly entering an appearance on radio and stage, she sang satire with the Hot Bagels until the trail went cold, and for 2 years has hosted the late-night courtroom drama Live and Sweaty, telecast from the O.J. Simpson Auditorium. Continuing the case for the affirmative, Lisbeth Gorr.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of Asia, good people of Australia, supporters of the West Coast Eagles, rats, cockroaches, my friends on the other side, and lawyers. Now, Penny Biggins, the first speaker for the negative, I'm not really quite sure what she was going on about. She said, what would we do without lawyers? Possibly, we'd all live very happy lives. She also made some stray comment about me having a burrito shoved up a place where the sun doesn't shine. Well, David, Tim, how's the weather back there? Just as I thought. Now, it is indeed a pleasure and an honour to be here as my true self, Lisbeth Gorr, rather than as that other reckless, wanton sports floozy Elle McFeast. Because Elle McFeast has no place in the law, taking her name Elle as she does from the Australian colloquial, Elle meaning long and leggy with a mean set of bazookas. Well, 1 out of 3 isn't so bad, but don't tell her I said so. You see, the law has no place for a mean set of bazookas. None at all. I pose the question, would such legal luminaries such as Malcolm Turnbull, Tom Hughes, Robert Richter, Alan Goldberg, would they inspire such fear, such awe, if they were blessed with a set of breasts? Well, maybe in Tasmania. But statistics show that in law, a proclivity to cleavage is a distinct career disadvantage. Now, our first speaker for the affirmative, the very delightfully pretty Tim Ferguson, I think exposed lawyers very well, once and for all, when he exposed them as money-hungry, BMW driving, Burke Street burping boogeymen that they really are. In fact, Tim defined appeal in a very broad, moral and social sense. Indeed, Tim's to be congratulated for making any sense whatsoever, considering he is merely an arts graduate. From Canberra. But in this second submission, yea, thus heretofore and aforementioned with regard to and with indeed respect inter alia, hereinafter referred to in the first person as I, I'll examine whether lawyers have indeed lost their appeal in a personal sense. Does a lawyer indeed have a personality? Is a lawyer something to aspire to? Can a parent still stand up proudly at a funeral and amidst the joyous laughter and celebration point down at that coffin and say, with pride, my son, the lawyer? Now, before you bombard back chat, that's not a sexist statement. The fact is, the phrase, my daughter the lawyer, is seldom uttered even amidst primitive tribes, such from which I spring, where the words lawyer and scumbucket aren't interchangeable. You see, the point is, as I've previously alluded, jugs and justice do not go hand in hand. Female judges, as rare as a modest bone in Jeff Kennett's body, my friends. Possibly because women just don't have the right first name. Have you noticed how judges always have the same first name? It's never Dave or Barry, it's always Justice. Mr. Justice Teague, Mr. Justice Brennan, Mr. Justice Murphy, Mr. Justice Jeans. You know, women have no hope. We have proper names like Yoko and Madonna and Kylie. In fact, there are only two industries more sexist against women than the law, and they are television and sport. But you'd have to be a complete and utter moron to get yourself involved with either of those. But, you know. Never mind, I'm flying. The law has no appeal for those of us with bazookas. None at all. I mean, face it, why get paid less, laid less, and be answerable to men who wear bigger shoulder pads than you? Let me tell you, the most appealing thing about working in a big city law firm, say in Burke Street, is it's just that much closer to Sports Girl. Then you can run down at the lunchtime fashion parades and heckle all the models going, "Speak, you bitch." So tell me, moving on, tell me how appealing is the prospect of life with a lawyer as your partner, as your companion, as your lover? Well, the law is a very demanding profession. And most lawyers will happily work from 7 a.m. till 9 p.m. at night, plus weekends. Which brings to mind only one word: boring. Boring, you know, his life is so limited. A lawyer thinks good theatre is a royal commission. He thinks a picnic is a government inquiry. A lawyer thinks an evening at home with the family is a contact visit. You know, let's face it, we're talking about someone who's more at home suing than screwing. This man would rather badger a witness than witness a beaver. And if you're gay, you can forget it. He'd drop a chance to cross-dress, to cross-examine just like that. We're talking about someone who is more at home with libel than labia, and that's just not natural. When it gets to the stage when the only briefs he's interested in getting his nose stuck into involve a case for the defense, well, then you know that the most appealing thing about living with a lawyer is that he's not home much. You could get more stimulating conversation from a toddler, and you do. You could get more passionate sex from the pool man, and you do, for God's sake. For God's sake, you haven't got a pool, he's a lawyer, he's too stingy for that. You see, lawyers make dreadful lovers, my friend, because they're just not trained for it. You know, lawyers never played doctors and nurses. They played habeas corpus. And then the mobile phone would ring and it would be corpus interruptus. Lawyers aren't into mushy words of love. Oh no, they're into Latin non sequiturs like adjusdum generis inter alia interlocutory proceedings. You know, if a lawyer must have a mouthful of Latin, why doesn't he learn cunnilingus? That's a good word. But I didn't notice that on the curriculum of the Melbourne University Law School. Then again, maybe I should have gone to Monash. Yes, my friends, lawyers have indeed lost their appeal. Take a look around you. Do we flock to the courts if we want to see a couple of prats pouncing around in wigs and gowns? No, we go and see Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. Do we now postpone our otherwise healthy social lives to sit down and watch the ongoing tussle between Grace Van Owen and Victor Cifuentes on LA Law? No! Now we're glued to Baywatch. And why? Because there is not a lawyer in sight. Just an abundance of the natural enemy of the lawyer, bazookas.
Professor Ross Harper studied law in Glasgow, where justice is unaffordable because the Scots are not prepared to pay for it. Nevertheless, Ross ekes out a living as senior partner of Harper MacLeod and Professor of Law at Strathclyde University, and has been president of the Glasgow Bar Association, the Law Society of Scotland, and presently the International Bar Association. If he accepts a higher appointment, may God have mercy on our souls. To continue the case for the negative, Professor Ross Harper.
Thank you, Chairman, for that introduction. I don't wish to start by flattering you, but I found that introduction quite the most recent. Let me say as an outset that there are 3,500 lawyers here in Melbourne as part of the International Bar Association. And whether at the end of the day you will agree that lawyers appeal to you, let me tell you that Melbourne appeals to us. The International Bar Association has 163 countries as members, and we represent 2.5 million lawyers. Now, I concede that's a hell of a lot of lawyers. And there's no doubt there's many in this audience, and certainly 3 over here, who would say that if these lawyers were laid end to end, they wouldn't reach a conclusion. But I say if comedians were laid end to end, that would be no bad thing. Not that I didn't enjoy Tim, his perfectly punctilious, perfunctory pauses. If I need to go for a pee, I know where to go. But let me tell you, Tim, this is not a personal plea I have. If this is a beauty parade, Tim, I concede. If it's appeal, my mother told me I lost my appeal when I was 10. Nothing to do with a lawyer. There's one lawyer had a nervous breakdown and said, I used to think people hated me because I'm a lawyer. I now know they hate me because I'm a mean, ugly bastard. Now, Tim, I have a problem with you. It's the company you keep. And I thought that perhaps Tim and Lisbeth, perhaps if they were married together, the TL team, totally lost. Now, Lisbeth was so full of these anti-lawyer jokes as well. She's the type of girl who gets into trouble. If she was in court and she was sentenced to a fine, she would be liable to stand up in court and say, "You stupid bastard," to the judge. Now, it may well be the judge would give her 6 months for contempt of court and 6 months for breach of the Official Secrets Act. The old ones are the best, because when the Queen heard that, she laughed, and so did Albert. But imagine Tim and Liz together. 20 years of anti-lawyer jokes, and they still wouldn't have run out. But perhaps Tim hasn't worked out the real need for a lawyer, but he would find it. Because after 25 years of happy marriage, the marriage starts to break up. And Tim, a beer or two, his youthful looks all disappearing, rather fat, rather like his colleague over there, plumpish, not fat. Tim then shouts out, "I'll kill you." His wife disappears, and PC Plod then comes to the house. Tim's a joker. He said, my wife, I threw her in the lake. And that stupid friend of hers too. There's a body found in the lake the very next week. So the policeman comes back to Tim and said, I'm charging you with murder. Now, Tim's read all the lawyer books, but hasn't read how to reply to the caution and charge. The best reply is, I will reply when you stop beating me with your truncheon. So he's taken to the police station. His braces are taken off. His belt's taken off. His shoelaces are taken off. He's put straight into a cell. And Tim thinks, well, things can't get very much worse. But I have news for you, Tim. They can, and they do. One of your companions in the cell is the only companion, and he's in for rape. Male rape. Multiple male rape. We'll call him Campbell. For the purposes of this story, because this is hypothetical. 6'2", eyes of blue. Campbell's coming after you. And Tim suddenly realizes he's in trouble. But 25 years of anti-lawyer jokes, will any lawyer act for Tim? Well, what does one do when one's in trouble? Perhaps David could help me. I've never done this with an ex-Prime Minister of New Zealand. I've never done this before. But David, if you could put your, like that, close together, and I will put that. Now, David, if you could say the word W-I-N-G.
Wing.
Now, if you say it 3 times reasonably quickly.
Wing, wing, wing. I hope this is not too highbrow for them.
Excuse me laughing, I've heard this before. Hello? Tim wants a lawyer. And the lawyer responds, I've got to say Tim responds quickly, responds urgently, and he responds with 2 words. Certainly might. Because lawyers are there to serve the public, even to serve Tim. Now, the chairman started with the words of Clarence Darrow. Now, Clarence Darrow happens to be my boyhood hero. And he said that when I entered the practice of my profession years ago, I was determined that there would never be a case, however unpopular or whatever the feeling, that I would refuse to do my duty and to defend that case. And I can honestly say that I kept that faith. I have never turned my back on any defendant, no matter what the charge. When the cry is loudest, the defendant needs the lawyer most. When every man has turned against him, the law demands that he should have a lawyer. And that sentiment, ladies and gentlemen, is shared and echoed by 2.5 million lawyers throughout the world. And on their behalf, I ask you to give, or if you're too mean to give, to lend your vote at the end of this exciting debate. If you believe in justice, you will clap loudly. If you're a Scot or descended from a Scot, or even know somebody who's descended from a Scot, then you'll clap even more loudly and justice will triumph. Thank you.
Many a lawyer becomes a politician, which may explain why a politician can sit on the fence and keep both ears to the ground. The Right Honourable David Lange practiced law in Auckland until 1977, when he entered Parliament and forgot about the law altogether. 7 years later, after numerous fruitless appeals, he became the youngest Prime Minister of New Zealand this century, and was also Minister for the Defence of the Realm against illegal nuclear-armed American warships. Since his... The jury's still out on that one. Since his resignation in 1989, he has been engaged full-time in preparing tonight's address to the jury. Will he get off? Let's bring him on, the third Speaker of the Affirmative, David Lange.
Well, it's a rather peculiar cultural experience here tonight. I always find Australia interesting. I'm grateful to my colleague for mentioning the word cunnilingus in public. I wanted to do that myself for years, but I didn't know whether I could get my tongue around it. If I could say also to those people on the other side who are unkind enough to refer to the inadequate lawyers who go into politics, and there's probably a fair observation. I want to say that I affirm the proposition that lawyers have lost their appeal. I do so more in sorrow than anger. I don't know where our Scottish learned friend was from over recent years, but in New Zealand it is not so much a problem of finding a lawyer as beating them off. But I have more to say about the president of the International Bar Association. You see, what you don't know is you haven't seen his history. He's a non-executive director of the Scottish prison system. Further, he is a person who is a cross-dresser and therefore probably in the best tradition of those who go into the law. Indeed, I suppose solicitors are the only people who can safely be said to not indulge in such practices. Further than that, he's a commander of the British Empire. Now, anyone that comes to such a relentlessly self-assured country as Australia and declares themselves a commander of the British Empire has got something going for them. I have to mention, of course, that I am a companion of honour. But, of course, in Australia, that's regarded simply as a sort of gay escort who works for a high-class, discreet credit-charging agency. I think it's important to recall that we are people who, while we despair of the law and its inadequacies, know that there are certain things which they have to contend with, and there are some lawyers who could do much better if they're allowed to have a go. I think one of the problems that we have with the law is that no one takes a great deal of notice of it. I never did. I mean, my behaviour when I was a lawyer, I didn't knock off the trust account because something in the Crimes Act told me not to. I didn't knock off the trust account because I was scared my mother would find out. That's the sort of imperative, and now, of course, we have courts pretending to be the places that deter. Nothing more ridiculous than to watch judges pontificating in cases where clearly they're not deterring. I only ever saw once a judge impose a sentence which could be regarded even remotely as a deterrent sentence. I was acting for a man in the far north of New Zealand who had taken a dozen bottles of beer from a holiday home. He had quite generous community of property principles, and he'd taken them. He discovered to his amazement at the age of 18 that he was charged with burglary. That's what you call burglary, taking a dozen bottles of beer. So duly, in the way the law works in New Zealand, he had a probation report prepared before he pleaded guilty. It's a remarkable way to do it, but he did. And the probation report, of course, was prepared by a lapsed Jesuit seminarian. All probation officers in New Zealand are lapsed Jesuit seminarians. except those that go into the Labor Party. Anyhow, what happened was, the Australian Labor Party's trying to get more of them in the hope they've kept some of their principles. But what happened was that he said to this young man, he said, he is living in a relatively unstructured environment. He's unable to reconcile the terminal polarities of society, and he's becoming increasingly solipsistic by nature. And the magistrate looked at that very seriously, and he started to deliver to this young man in the dock a lecture on Austinian and Hofeldian principles of reciprocity. Your right not to be assaulted means that you restrain yourself from assaulting others. The protection of your property means that you respect that of others. It went on multisyllabically for a very long time. And the chap in the dock was getting more and more confident. This couldn't have anything to do with him at all. It was some performance that was done for the benefit of others. And then the magistrate came to the punch line. And the magistrate looked at this chap in the dock, and he engaged his eyes, and there was a slight doubt came over the man, and suddenly he said to this by now 19-year-old, gone on for so long like some of these things here tonight. Anyhow, he said, I want to tell you this, if you come back before the court again, you're liable to be incarcerated. And he went like that. And you know, I've never seen him back in court again. It was a remarkably effective thing. I want to say that I am not a lawyer anymore, and I'm glad of that. After 18 years in the law, I went straight and went into politics. Then I came out sort of the other end of politics, thought I'd go back to law again. And you know, I learned the respect of the law for the second time. I applied for my practicing certificate. And I sent a reference from a former Attorney General, Sir Geoffrey Palmer, who said that I was the closest to Jefferson that he'd met. I was exactly the sort of guy that ought to practice law. Gareth Evans didn't have anything on me at all as far as the lawyer was concerned. And Gough Whitlam was a mere apprentice. And I had another one from a chap who was a transport minister who was a Jesuit. And he wrote a letter which said, this man is a privy councillor, res ipsa loquitur. And the Law Society said, so was John Stonehouse, and didn't give me a practicing certificate.
As the hapless Judge Wills cautioned the great English barrister F.E. Smith, I have listened to your case, Mr. Smith, and I am no wiser now than I was when you started. To which F.E. replied, possibly not, Your Honour, but far better informed. Peter Moon is not exactly uninformed, but like much of the law, he remains unreformed. A law graduate from the University of Melbourne, he's overcome that obstacle to be a suburban practitioner and part-time producer of trial by jury. He's been debating for over 30 years and he's still only 36. So presumably he won the case against his parents. Tonight, understandably, he's legally unrepresented, which means he'll be condemned out of his own mouth. The third speaker for the negative, Peter Moon.
This is a debate, Mr. Chairman, about what people really think. It isn't a debate about what people say they think. You didn't need to pay $25 as a donation to the Campbell McComas Hair Restoration Fighting Fund merely to find out, ladies and gentlemen, that people make lawyer jokes. That, ladies and gentlemen, is $50 a double. If all you wanted was to hear some lightweight analysis from a comedian from Canberra, if all you wanted to hear was an ex-Labor Prime Minister dumping on his old work colleagues, for $50 you could have bought a copy of the Hawke memoirs and killed two birds with one stone. And had change left over for something really useful like a Baywatch wall calendar. I am so glad that Ms. Gorr mentioned Baywatch, because Baywatch is like lawyers. Baywatch is just another example of something that people slag, but they really rather like. Mr. Chairman, if all the people who say that Baywatch leaves them cold didn't watch it, Channel 10 would save its money and just give us an evening repeat of Mass for You at Home. The truth is that on Sunday nights at 7:30, their broadcast tower is practically sucked out of the ground as 400,000 Australian televisions start just happening to pick up Channel 10 all at once. And in homes all around Australia, Mr. Chairman, men are saying, oh, bugger it, Dorothy, it's this Baywatch crap. I think I'll read a magazine. Meanwhile, Dorothy's out in the kitchen with a silicon gun from the Silly's handyman bar trying to get the stuff to set inside her bathing cosy. That, Mr. Chairman, is what people really think of Baywatch. Now, the question may occur to you, how then do you tell what people really think of lawyers? Well, it's the same way you find out the truth about everything else in Australia. You watch the ABC. Now, Ross came here tonight having absolutely no idea how central a cultural icon the ABC is in this country. In fact, at 4 o'clock today, he didn't know what the ABC was. He was firmly convinced he was coming to address a gathering of the Australian Bagpiping Club. And who can blame him, Mr. Chairman? They said, come to Australia. They said, talk to the ABC with Mr. McComas and Mr. Ferguson. Poor bugger spent 2 hours wasted in the Glasgow Library trying to find out who the hell the McFeasts were. Penny and I were there to set him straight. We said to him, Ross, the ABC is the marketing division of telecom in this country. And the ABC, ladies and gentlemen, in case you haven't noticed, is awash with lawyers. The organisation that presents the viewing on the radio we love is absolute. In Melbourne alone, Mr. Chairman, in Melbourne radio, if you like to look at it, John Fain is a lawyer, Susanna Lopez is a lawyer, Terry Laidler's a lawyer, Elaine Canty, believe it or not, is a lawyer. David Hill needs a lawyer. There's Lisbeth Gorr, of course, and don't forget yourself, Mr. Chairman. Look at World Series debating itself, the most successful program in the history of English broadcasting, after Neighbours. And Neighbours, Mr. Chairman, only beats you because it screens in Japan and you don't. Of course, it's not called Neighbours there. In Japanese, it's translated as the people crammed in next door. But what is the secret of your success, Mr. Chairman? It is your unfailing ability to identify subjects that people here want to talk about and want to listen to. Subjects that are interesting and appealing. Look at your past debates. You've talked about sex and romance and sex appeal and brains and sex and laughter. You have a real problem, don't you? There are no unappealing debates on Radio Campbell. Lawyers have appeal. And we applaud your generous offer to refund the ticket price of every person in this theatre if they vote the other way. Can we have a round of applause for Campbell's generous cashback offer, please? Let's just have a look at Mr. Lange, the Hugh Jelly of New Zealand politics. What's his agenda in bagging his old profession? Now, I'm a fan, and an unashamed fan of this man. This is the man that stood up to the Yankee war machine back when most of us thought that the nuclear-free South Pacific was a Rodgers and Hammerstein musical. But it doesn't take much, does it, Mr. Chairman, for old Labor Prime Ministers to start bagging their old mates. Doesn't take a lot of encouragement after the Hawke Bile file was published. Paul Keating is already working on his exposé of the current cabinet as part of his 12-volume autobiography entitled Encyclopedia Anti-Britannica. And now David's getting into the mood, starting with his old profession. If lawyers are so bad, why didn't he do something about them when he was in a position to, back when he was the fat controller of New Zealand? Why didn't he pass a few laws against them? Or why didn't he at least denounce them on nationwide television? That's not a big ask. It's not a wide nation. Then we turn to Ms. Gorr. Ms. Gorr, another successful export to Japanese television, where Live and Sweaty is now showing on Japanese cable as Godzilla and her sporting friends. This woman was not dragged into the law. She went there of her own free will. This girl knows her own mind, or what's left of it. And she knows, this woman knows, no matter what she says, ladies and gentlemen, that it'll be a great fallback for her law degree in case the bottom ever drops out of her comic career. And then, Mr. Chairman, sweet Tim. Tim is the person in this room who more than anybody should back the lawyers, because when the only thing you do well is break rules, the people who make the rules are your best friend. I mean, we are the people, conservatives like you and me, who create the social walls that he vandalises. If it wasn't for lawyers and people like them, Tim would be just another pin-up boy with a Hitler haircut. At this point, Mr. Chairman, this debate is resolved down to a stark moral choice. Are we going to declare that this is a community where people are free to make a choice as to their career and they will be respected? Or are we simply going to vote to make a grab for Campbell's money? Well, now the choice is yours, and I leave you with it. But just remember this. If you do decide to take the moral low ground, ladies and gentlemen, and if you do decide to make the grab for the grubby cash, Ross and I negotiated the deal and our usual scale of fees applies.
Peter Moon personifying the old saying that if you come out of a meeting with a lawyer and you're not feeling confused, then you simply don't understand what's going on. And so, to the summings up. First by Tim Ferguson for the affirmative, followed immediately for the negative by Penny Biggins.
Well, I have to say I've been conferring with my lawyers in the corner there, and my mind has gone completely blank. I can't remember a thing. I didn't keep any books, I didn't keep any notes, and I've developed a fear of flying. But some things do stick in my mind, like some of the wussiest, trashy, gutless arguments I've ever heard in my life. Good Lord, people! First we had wussy argument number 1 from Penny Biggins QC. My God, yes, of course. Well, I was looking at it the wrong way. Lawyers are luscious, lovely, gentle people. They're like human doonas. It's absolutely true, and Bromham Bishop is a spunk, and Iraq is peace-loving, and Danny Minogue has a lot of talent. And Elizabeth Taylor is still a virgin. Then, of course, we had wuss argument number 2 from Ross Harper, the last Tory in Scotland. Ross, no wonder you came out here. The Conservatives aren't too popular in the north. I mean, you didn't manage to bring a translation, did you? Because, frankly, I couldn't understand a word you were saying. I'm sure it was lovely. It's just that Esperanto hasn't quite taken off in Australia yet, but you give us some time. Mind you, we all loved the kilt. I mean, you looked fantastic there, and I'm sure everybody across the nation, across the globe, is wondering what you've got under there. It's got to be a shorty. There's only one longie in this room, and he's on our side. And just between you and me, Ross Hargwick, the new the Clon MacLeod, your McLeans are showing. And that's not all. But frankly, your story about the jail didn't quite terrify me. 6'2", eyes are blue. Well, 6'3", I'm quite horny. And Campbell better run away. Settle down, you're becoming a mob. Then we had a wussy conservative argument number 3 from Peter Moon QC. Now, you may not realise this, but Peter is, in fact, a professional debater. That's right, people. You look cheated. Peter is in this for the money. He doesn't believe the claptrap he's been coming out with. The simple fact is that no one on our side is accepting a red cent for being here today. I've just actually remembered there is an international law conference happening right here in the World Congress Centre, is there not? That's right, there are over 1,000 lawyers in this building right now, which probably explains why I saw a bloke outside with a wig and a gown and his foot in a pile of dog poo going, "I'm melting! I'm melting!" Ah. And as I look around the room now, I see that the place is riddled with lawyers. Yes, those who don't want to clap at the front are just jiggling their BMW keys. Good Lord, the first time in human history when lawyers finally get to be judged before the people and they try to rig it. Well, I think I speak for all people in Australia when I say to the lawyers here in the room, make like a duck with a rash and stick your bill up your butt. And if you don't like that, you can sue me. Campbell, ring your damn bell, the prosecution rests.
Howdy. Now, you are probably aware that the most loved and favoured musical genre throughout the legal profession is country and western music. Well, it makes sense, doesn't it, you know, with its simple themes of freedom, justice, those dirty old treating hearts having it out again. So what we've decided to do this evening is to honour that love by summing up this fantastic debate with an original country and western song. I've been sitting over here with a scotch and broken heart, going over all you said, it's tearing us apart. Listening to you three betray a truth you really feel, when you know as well as I do lawyers ain't lost their appeal. Let's start with the pretty boy. Yeah, Big Dave, I mean you. You said that there are too many lawyers, but you were a lawyer too. So you sort out politics to get some quick relief. Well, I'd have thought by now you'd stop examining your briefs. And Libby Gorr said lawyers suck. Well, who doesn't every now and then? I kind of thought it was pity, but then I go again. Libby just said everything that I found rather petty. She'll be calling lawyers when they cancel Live and Sweaty. And Tim contends that lawyers are so bad for your health, but he lets them draw up his contracts to maximize his wealth. A lawyer is like you and me. They work just to get paid, to feed the spouse and kiddies, then go home. That's all they crave. When you find yourself in trouble, you can forget Mother Mary. That's what a lawyer's for. Who would you choose to represent you? Ross, Harper or Libby Gorr? But just what does the future hold for these aging self-promoters? The only things Tim will be touching up are the wrinkles on his photos. Libby's gnarled old hands will still be grasping for a ball, while David will be signing his memoirs at your local shopping mall. But lawyers just keep practicing according to the law's letter, and as practice makes you perfect, old lawyers just get better. I was going to put a little bit of a key change in here, but I've got a rather limited vocal range, so I'll spare you that. But arguments like rivers run, ours clear, but theirs is silty. Vote for us and Ross will show what lurks beneath his kilty. Yes, we want you to pluck the flower of justice. Ours proud while theirs is wilty. There's only one true verdict. Your Honours, we're not guilty. Hey!
I think it's fair to say this is quite without precedent, as most good legal decisions are. In determining how to try this landmark case, I've relied on the authority of Norman Lindsay. If you've a case without a judge, it's clear your case will never budge. But if a judge you have to face, the chances are you'll lose your case. To win your case and save your pelf, why? Try the blooming case yourself. And so I shall. The verdict will be considered by a jury of 1,200. and will be decided on the length of your applause. Non-lawyers, take your hands out of your pockets. Lawyers, take your hands out of other people's pockets. And away we go. Those in favour of the motion that lawyers have lost their appeal. Yes, well, we've got a rough idea what the jury's thinking. And those against the motion, arguing that lawyers have not lost their appeal. Very, very little in it, but I award it to the affirmative team. And from that, there'll be no appeal. So Shakespeare was right after all. The first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers. If only capital punishment could punish their capital. And what do I think? If it please the court, I'll defer to the persuasive decision of Lord Justice Bramwell. I have listened attentively to the learned and lucid arguments of the very eminent counsel, without, unfortunately, being able to understand any of them. And I have just listened to the most profound and luminous judgments of my learned brethren, with still greater attention, but I regret to say, with no better result. I am, therefore, of the same opinion as they are, and for the same reasons. And if you still believe justice is blind, I'll see you in court. On the other hand, I put it to you, what's law for but one for rich and one for poor? Redress all wrongs if the money's right. I rest my case. Adjourned. Good night.
You can find a range of World Series debates on video and audio tape at all ABC shops and centres. Tonight, Julian Clary and his loyal companion, Russell, set off on an Australian adventure. Brace yourself, Sydney. Julian goes down under, coming up on ABC right after a news update.